Hello, everyone. I have a story to tell you guys because I have talked about my homelessness and how it was a lot of years of off and on homelessness in my life. And people ask me how I became homeless initially, the first time. And I'm going to tell you what happened. After I graduated high school and after I had gone to college for a little bit, I moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I had an apartment set up about 2 weeks before I moved. I actually took a trip to Minneapolis, got an apartment set up in this slummy, crazy, terrible, dirty place. But I thought, you know what? It's not forever. It's just something I'm going to do until I find something better. Yeah. Okay. So I got it. I paid the deposit, the rent, everything was taken care of. And I moved a couple weeks later and got this apartment. And I was there for a little while, like a few months. I had survivor's benefits coming in at the time, so I didn't have to get a job immediately. I was looking for one, but it was hard to find one because I had no work history other than face painting and art. So, yeah, it's kind of hard. But I did get a job eventually at the orchestra hall a little later on. But at first I was just living off survivor's benefits and looking for work. And that was enough to cover my rent and everything. But one day, somebody had kicked in the door of my apartment while I was gone and just destroyed the place. And the landlord blamed me, tried to say that I knew the people who did it and that I had set it all up. And this was like a slumlord who didn't want to listen, who didn't understand. She didn't care. She just wanted to kick people out. She just wanted money. She didn't fix anything. There was bugs everywhere. It was horrible. And I didn't like it anyway, but I didn't know much about life back then. I didn't know that I should have gone to court and tried to fight it or anything. And she tried to do an unlawful detainer on me for damage, for, everything like that. She tried to lock me out of my apartment, even though I had paid the rent. It was awful. She was in the wrong too, but I didn't know to fight it. I didn't know my rights. I knew nothing about this stuff. It was only the second place I had ever rented in my life. I had an apartment while I was in high school. But I left that one amicably, it was fine. And that wasn't even in the city, that was in a different town. But this was only the second place I'd ever rented. I was only 19 years old at this time. So anyway, this lady filed an unlawful detainer on me, and I had to go to court the next day. And I was walking down Hennepin Avenue, which is a main street of Minneapolis, and a man comes up to me. It was around like 9th, 10th Street, Minneapolis, and just attacks me in the street. Starts punching me, shoving me. We got in this huge fight, and I was hitting him back. Like, we were punching each other, like, full-on fight. Me and this guy that I didn't even know this guy, right? He finally shoves me and knocks me down, and because I had, like, these platform shoes on at the time, snaps my foot sideways and broke my foot instantly, and I fell, and I couldn't get back up. So he started beating the living crap out of me. And we were in front of this bar and grill that doesn't exist anymore. This guy who was working in the bar and grill, who happened to be the manager there at the time, runs out the door. He sees what's going on outside of his business. He chases the guy away. He picks me up and brings me to the hospital and, rescues me. I go to the ER. I find out my foot is broken really badly from this fight. And yeah, I had to get a cast and everything, and I was on crutches. And I got kept in the hospital overnight because it was messed up. I mean, I was beat up in other places. I had a black eye. I had bruises all over my chest. And I missed the court date the next day because of it. And I tried to tell them I need to get there, but I couldn't get there. And they would not listen to my reason, even though it was legitimate, I think. But I don't really know because I was 19 years old. So I lost my apartment because of that. And then I was homeless on the street with a broken foot for months. I was living in the park. I had an unlawful detainer on my record, so nobody else would rent to me at this time. Once you have an unlawful detainer, especially in the city, they just don't want to hear it, because there's so many people that want each apartment that they can pick and choose. And, I didn't have a lot of money, but I wanted to get a job. It's hard to run around job hunting with a broken foot. And I was living in this park with these waterfalls. Now, this park doesn't have the waterfalls anymore, but the park still exists. The restaurant that the guy came out of and helped me does not exist anymore. And I don't even know if the apartment building I got kicked out of exists anymore, or it's probably owned by somebody new. I can't imagine that lady made it this far. It's been a lot of years. 25 years. So anyhow, I was 19 years old living in the park homeless with a bunch of other street punk people, and some of them were underage, and they had been thrown out of their home by their parents because they were gay, lesbian, or transgendered, which is horrible. It's just horrible. People should not abandon their children for any reason like that, but they did. So they were out there, and we used to go to these underage and under 21 like youth places to get food and stuff or to get help, and they were trying to find us a place to live too, but it was hard with the unlawful detainer, even if they vouched for you. So I was sleeping in this park for months with these people, and luckily it was still summer. I met this man named Richard, and he started talking to me in the park, and he was a lot older than me. Richard was in his 50s, and I was 19, but he was a really decent person. I mean, he was a really good guy, and people did not believe it. Like, they're like, oh, this guy is older and he's trying to do something or get something or harm you or something, but he wants you for a sexual relationship, which was completely untrue because this man was a gay man. You know, he didn't want sex from me. He was gay, wasn't interested. But one day he asked me to come stay with him, and I took him up on his offer because I was out there with broken foot. And I knew I was never going to heal walking around 12 hours a day on this foot that was still broken, hurting, and, you know, on crutches trying to get around when everybody else was out there doing what they needed to do. And I was getting left behind, and I don't know. It was terrible. I was sleeping in the rain, and I didn't know anything about homeless shelters at the time, but I did also know they don't like 19-year-olds and people under 21 going to the adult homeless shelters. So yeah, they didn't have a lot set up then. There was a couple places where you could drop in during the day, but you could not sleep there. They just didn't have sleeping facilities for people that age at the time. They do now. They have special places for people now. But anyhow, Richard told me to come live with him, and he lived in public housing, and I didn't know what that was at the time. So I went to live with him, not knowing that he wasn't allowed to have me there. And he never let on. Like, he never let me know this. So he ended up losing his apartment because of me, and I felt terrible about this because he didn't let me know that I had to be on the lease to live there, and he never told me I need to put you on the lease. Nobody ever gave me any inkling that there was a problem that I lived with him, and I didn't know how rent worked then. Okay, and I know all these things now because I have lived in public housing now, and I know how serious they take this stuff. So I felt terrible that he was going to get evicted because of me, and he saved me. I stayed with him for 3 or 4 months. And my foot healed up immediately as soon as I had a place to be. But then I was still working with the youth hostel places and the other drop-in centers and things to try and find a place to live. And I was also looking for a job. And I did find a job. I looked in the paper because that's how people did it then. There was no internet for me. There was internet in 1994, 1995. It was brand new. But we didn't really do it that way. We still went into the paper to look for a job. And I saw Orchestra Hall. They want people working in the office. And I walked in. I didn't know how to apply for a job. I walked in, and I did an interview with the manager of this place, and I got the job on the spot. So I had a job. So in a couple weeks, I was going to start getting paid, and I told these people that. I said, I've got an income coming in besides survivor's benefits, which are running out. Can you find me a place or something? And they're like, well, with the unlawful detainer, we're going to have a heck of a time. But they did find me an art studio, which wasn't really legal to live in based on the fire marshal's standard of fire safety, but at least it was a business kind of setting, you know, like a studio with a bunch of rooms, and it was actually really big, and it was only a couple $100s a month, which I had now. So they found me this art studio and got me in there, and I started a business when I was 19 years old in this art studio making and selling my own art. But then one night when I was in this art studio, one of the people that was mad at the landlord for some reason decided he was going to burn the building down. He lit it on fire, and the fire spread really fast because this was a really old building. The fire safety codes were not up to standard, and half the place burned, and including my studio. I lost everything again. And so did my neighbors, and so did one of the people that lived across the hall from me who was actually kind of famous. Like, they were selling their art for thousands of dollars in New York City and stuff, and they lost everything too. They lost a lot more than I did, but I lost everything too, and that was my concern. And I walked out onto the street with a bag of clothes and nothing else that time. you know, and that time I didn't get a place or recover so quickly. And I jumped from place to place and lived in garages and abandoned buildings for a while because I was about ready to give up at this time. My parents were still alive at this time, but I didn't want to like ask them to help me or take me back, or I don't know what I was thinking. You know, I did tell them sort of what was going on, but I didn't want to worry them to death because my parents were a couple generations older than me as it was. And I guess I just felt like I could do it on my own, but I couldn't. And I did make some mistakes, but, you know, I tried to do it on my own and didn't know what I was doing. You know, I was only like 19 going on 20 at this time. And then I had to live in a bunch of random places and stuff. And I guess I could get into that a little later. And I want to tell my whole story in order, but that is what happened to me there. And now Richard moved into this art studio with me. That's the thing. See, I moved him with me because he lost his place for me. And I felt bad about it. And I says, you know what? You did me a favor. I'll do you a favor. And I did. But then we lost that together because of the fire and we didn't know what to do, you know. And then right around this time, Richard was feeling sick and he went to the doctor and he found out he was dying of cancer. So yeah, we knew it was really far along, like they wouldn't even treat it. They wouldn't give him any chemo or anything because they said, you know what, it spreads so much that there's nothing we can do. And that's a hard thing to have to deal with. And, you know, we knew like they gave him about 6 months to live. And he was like 52 years old. I was 19. He was my best friend in the world, you know. He was my best friend and he was that much older than me. But he had always been there for me. Never did anything wrong to me. And I lost him. Like he died within 6 months. They were right, you know, and he found it in his neck, but I guess it had started in his kidneys. So it had spread that far before he even found it. And I lost my friend. I lost my best friend. So I was alone again. Alone on the street without my friend that had saved my life. So yeah, I'm going to tell the rest of my story. My story on my next video, okay? So yeah, I watched him die. And that's a whole nother story. But anyhow, yeah, I've lost a lot of people, not just him. And I'll get into that later. But I just wanted to tell you that that's how I became homeless. The first time. The second time too. And how I lost my first friend that I ever met in Minneapolis. All right, so in my next story time, I will tell you a little bit more of my story, okay, guys? Oh, gosh.